CEO Billionaire sees his ex-girlfriend waiting for Uber with three 6-year-old boys, identical to him. This is a story of heartbreak discovery and the impossible road to redemption. Get ready to feel it all, the weight of regret, the hope of second chances, and the moment a father is born, not by blood, but by choice. Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world are you watching from. We love hearing from you. Now settle in. This one's going to stay with you. The July sun pounded down on Boston like an unforgiving spotlight, turning asphalt into a shimmering mirage and fraying the tempers of even the most patient commuters. Horns blared across intersections. Luxury cars sat idle in gridlock, and the heat shimmered against the reflective glass of the city's towering skyline. Among the stalled chaos, a sleek black Bentley pulled up at a curb just outside the financial district. The door opened smoothly, and out stepped a man whose presence turned more than a few heads, despite the oppressive heat. Cameron Whitaker adjusted the cuffs of his Italian linen suit, straightened his posture, and surveyed the congested street with a look of mild irritation. At 38, he was the CEO and founder of Whitaker Dynamics, one of America's fastest-growing tech conglomerates. 6 years ago, he had left Boston to expand his company across Asia. Now he returned not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a billionaire and one of the most recognizable faces in the business world. "I'll walk the rest of the way," he told his driver through the open window, waving him off. The driver hesitated. "Sir, the penthouse is still about a mile out." "Are you sure?" Cameron nodded already, adjusting the strap on his leather briefcase. "I could use the fresh air, or whatever counts for it in this city." The Bentley pulled away with a hesitant growl, leaving Cameron alone on the sun-drenched sidewalk. The noise of the city swallowed him quickly. He walked with long, purposeful strides, his sharp silhouette cutting through the bustle of street vendors, tourists, and pedestrians on lunch breaks. As he moved through familiar yet somehow foreign streets, Cameron was struck by how much Boston had changed. Tower cranes dotted the skyline. Old buildings had vanished, and new ones stood in their place like unfamiliar neighbors. He passed a corner where a bookstore used to be, now a smoothie chain. Another block, a beloved old diner, had been replaced by a boutique fitness center. He had built an empire. He had watched stock prices soar and negotiated contracts worth more than most families would earn in a lifetime. He had done it all with a singular, relentless focus, leaving little room for nostalgia. Still a strange ache lingered in his chest. His mind had already returned to his scheduled tomorrow's investor pitch, Thursday's media appearance, Friday's board review when he turned a corner near a busy Walmart and his feet came to a sudden stop. Across the wide sidewalk, a woman in her mid-30s stood struggling to balance 2 grocery bags while keeping pace with 3 small boys who were clearly testing the limits of her patience. "Liam, give that back to your brother Aiden. Slow down before someone gets hurt." "Noah." "Noah, stay close, please." Cameron blinked. The voice. It hit him with the force of a long-lost melody, his breath caught in his throat. The chaos around him dulled to a distant hum. He knew that voice. He hadn't heard it in 6 years, and yet it felt carved into his memory. Natalie. She was facing away from him, crouched down to tie a child's shoelace, her hair falling forward in a curtain of warm brown waves. But as one of the boys tugged at her sleeve, she looked up, and their eyes met. Time stilled. Natalie Rhodes. The woman he had once loved. The woman he had left behind. Her expression twisted in a flicker of recognition. Surprise hurt and a flash of fear. But Cameron's eyes weren't on her anymore. They had shifted slowly, almost involuntarily, to the 3 children surrounding her. They were 6, maybe 7, all boys. And all of them bore features he recognized in the mirror every morning. The same green eyes, the same chin and jawline that had defined 3 generations of Whitakers. One of them even tilted his head in that same unconscious gesture Cameron made when something puzzled him, a quirk no one else had ever mimicked. He felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Without realizing it, he took a step forward, then another. One of the boys noticed Mom. "Who's that guy staring at us?" Natalie stood up slowly, the grocery bags forgotten. She placed a protective arm in front of her son's Cameron, she said softly. He stopped a few feet away, heart pounding Natalie. He breathed. Are they? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted around, wary of the growing number of eyes in the crowd. We have to go, she said suddenly, grabbing Liam's hand and motioning for the others to follow. Come on, boys. Wait. His voice cracked. Please, just can we talk? Natalie paused for a moment, staring at him like someone unsure whether to run or speak. Then with a swift motion, she dug into her purse, pulled out a crumpled receipt and scribbled something down. She handed it to him without meeting his eyes. Tomorrow noon. Maple and Pine Cafe on 14th and Greenleaf. And just like that, she was gone, her boys trailing behind her like echoes of a life he never knew existed. Cameron stood motionless, the scrap of paper in his hand fluttering slightly in the breeze. Around him, the city carried on horns, honking bikes, weaving tourists, snapping photos. But inside, his world had come to a sudden jarring stop. He read the names again in his mind. Aiden, Liam, Noah. They weren't just hers. They were his. He turned slowly, staring into the direction they had disappeared. A storm cloud crept across the sky, blotting out the sun. But he didn't notice rain began to fall. People ran for shelter. He didn't move. Cameron Whitaker, billionaire, empire builder, boardroom titan, stood in the rain like a man who had just discovered the true value of everything he had once walked away from. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do next. Cameron sat alone at a corner table in the Maple and Pine Cafe, its wood-paneled walls and soft indie music doing little to soothe his fraying nerves. The bell above the front door chimed every few minutes as new customers trickled in, but none were her. His watch ticked past. 11:55, then 11:58. He sipped his coffee, a caramel roast that had long since gone lukewarm. His fingers drummed restlessly on the tabletop. He hadn't slept much. The night before, his penthouse had felt emptier than ever. For hours he had paced between the kitchen island and the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, staring blankly at the skyline. The city glittered with possibility, but none of it mattered. Not anymore. Not since he'd seen them, those three boys with his eyes. His sons. Even now, the phrase felt alien. He had built a billion-dollar empire, negotiated acquisitions in 5 languages, walked into rooms where world leaders paused to listen. But nothing had prepared him for this. At precisely noon, the door chimed again, and in walked Natalie. Cameron stood instinctively, but she held up a hand. Let's not make this a scene. She was dressed simply white blouse jeans, no makeup. But she walked with a calm strength that made every head turn. She sat across from him, eyes cool, guarded. You look exactly the same, he said after a pause. Natalie raised an eyebrow. You don't. You look tired. He gave a weak chuckle and sat down. Fair enough. An awkward silence settled between them. 6 years of absence hung in the air like a fog. He reached for the receipt she'd scribbled on. Thank you for this. For coming. I almost didn't, she said quietly. But they asked about you last night. They sensed something. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry. You keep saying that. She said, her voice sharper now. But sorry, doesn't raise 3 kids. Sorry, doesn't cover school uniforms. Doctor visits are 2 a.m. Fevers when I had no one else to call. I didn't know, he said. I swear, Natalie. If I had known, I tried, she snapped. I called, emailed. I even went to Whitaker Dynamics' Boston office. I sat in the lobby for 2 hours before someone finally told me you'd moved operations to Singapore, and that was that. Cameron's shoulders slumped. She wasn't lying. He remembered the months after his departure. Vividly grueling, consuming, intoxicating. He had buried himself in work, convinced that carving out a global empire required total sacrifice, including her. I blocked it all out, he admitted. I told myself it was better cleaner. I thought maybe I'd be a distraction to you, that we'd both move on faster. Her laugh was bitter. You didn't move on, Cameron. You disappeared. He didn't deny it. What could he say? The truth was uglier than any justification he could offer. He had chosen ambition. He had walked away from the one person who had grounded him. I saw them yesterday. he whispered, and everything in me just unraveled. She studied him carefully. You really didn't know. He looked her straight in the eyes. No. Not a clue. Natalie sighed, her fingers lacing around her coffee cup. They were born 7 months after you left. Aiden came first by 4 minutes. Then Liam. Then Noah. I didn't even know I was carrying triplets until the second ultrasound. A weak smile passed over her lips. You should have seen the look on my face I wish I had, he said, his voice raw. She blinked, surprised by the sincerity. For a moment the wall between them cracked, but it returned just as quickly. I did it alone, she said firmly. Everything, the diapers, the preschool applications. Working 2 jobs and studying online when they slept, I had no choice but to be both mother and father. I want to be part of their lives. Cameron said, truly. Natalie didn't respond right away. She stared out the window at a passing bus. When she turned back, her eyes had softened just slightly. You don't just get to walk back in after 6 years and claim fatherhood. Like it's a title you misplaced, she said. They don't know you, you're a stranger. I don't want to be, he said. I know I can't change the past, but I can show them who I am now, who I'm ready to be. She watched him for a long time as if trying to detect any cracks in his resolve. Friday evening, she said finally, 6 o'clock. Come to our house. Not as a CEO, not as a man trying to fix what's broken, just as someone who wants to meet 3 6-year-old boys who happen to share his face. Cameron's breath caught. Thank you, I'll be there. Natalie took a napkin, wrote down her address, and slid it across the table. As she stood to leave, Cameron reached for his coffee again, unsure what else to say. But she turned back at the door. For the record, she said, they're amazing. Each in their own way. You missed out on so much. Cameron, don't miss out again. And with that, she was gone. Friday came faster than Cameron expected, and yet somehow not fast enough. By the time the Bentley pulled into the quiet residential street in Brighton just a few minutes before 6:00 p.m., his palms were sweating. The street was lined with modest 2-story homes, bikes and chalk drawings scattered across driveways, a far cry from the world of marble lobbies and rooftop terraces he was used to. Natalie's house was painted a faded blue, with a slightly crooked mailbox that read, "The Rhodes Family," in hand-painted white letters. Cameron turned off the ignition and sat for a moment staring at the house. He had closed billion-dollar deals, spoken on global stages, and navigated crises that had left lesser men shattered. But nothing had prepared him for meeting his children for the first time. He checked the gift bags beside him again. Each held a carefully wrapped model airplane, different colors, same make. He had spent hours choosing them, wanting something thoughtful, something to say. I see you without words. When he finally rang the doorbell, the cheerful chime clashed violently with the storm of anxiety in his chest. Natalie opened the door wearing jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She looked both casual and commanding the way only mothers could. You're on time, she said simply, stepping aside. I didn't want to mess up before I even started, Cameron replied, managing a tight smile as he stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of spaghetti and cinnamon. There were toys tucked into corners, school papers pinned to the refrigerator, and a family photo collage above the sofa, though notably no trace of him. The place was small but warm. Lived in, real. They're in the living room, Natalie said. Walking ahead, I told them you were an old friend. I didn't want to overwhelm them. Cameron nodded, clutching the gift bags tightly. His legs suddenly felt heavy, and then he saw them. 3 boys sat huddled on the couch, different shirts, same sea green eyes, his eyes. Aiden wore a red shirt with a cartoon rocket. Liam had a navy one with dinosaurs. Noah, in green, sat slightly apart, arms crossed. They looked up in near-perfect synchronization, curiosity etched across their faces. Boys, Natalie said, gently but firmly. This is Cameron. He's your father. Aiden was the first to react. He stood up, brushing popcorn crumbs from his shirt, and walked over confidently. I'm Aiden. he said, extending a hand far too formally for a 6-year-old. I'm the oldest, by 4 minutes. Cameron bent down and took his hand. Nice to meet you. Aiden, I heard you like planes. Aiden's face lit up. Yeah, I want to be a pilot. Cameron handed him the first gift bag. Then I think you'll like this. Liam approached next, more cautious. He clutched a dog-eared book in one hand and peered up at Cameron. I'm Liam. I'm in the middle. Are you really our dad? The question hit Cameron like a gut punch, but he nodded slowly. Yes, I didn't know until a few days ago, but now that I do, I want to know everything about you. Liam didn't smile, but he accepted the second bag, looking inside with quiet interest. Noah stayed put. I'm not going, he said flatly. Natalie gave him a look, but Cameron shook his head. It's okay. He set the third bag down on the coffee table and walked a few feet closer. Hi, Noah. You don't have to come to me. I just want to say I'm sorry. I wasn't here before. I would have been, if I'd known. Noah's eyes narrowed. That's what grown-ups say when they mess up. Cameron blinked, startled by the raw honesty. He probably didn't want to meet us. Noah added. That's why he never came. Noah, Natalie said, gently stepping in. Cameron held up a hand. It's okay. He's right to be angry. He knelt so he could look Noah in the eyes from across the room. You're smart and you're right. I did mess up. I made a choice years ago that took me away. And because of that, I missed out on you, on all of you. But if you'll let me, I'd really like to be part of your lives now. Noah didn't respond. He just stared, arms still crossed. But his silence, Cameron realized, wasn't rejection. It was protection. After a beat, Aiden interrupted the tension by pulling his airplane out of the bag. Whoa, this one has landing gear that works, thanks, Dad. Is it okay if I call you that? Cameron's chest clenched. Yeah, he whispered. Yeah, that's okay. Liam sat down cross-legged, examining the parts of his own plane with methodical focus. Do you know how planes fly? He asked. Like the actual physics, Cameron grinned. A little. I studied engineering before I started my company. That sparked a barrage of questions from both Aiden and Liam, and soon the room buzzed with energy. They wanted to know everything: where he'd traveled, what he built, how fast his car could go, and whether he had ever ridden in a real fighter jet. Only Noah remained distant, occasionally glancing up from his corner as if trying to assess whether any of this was real. 2 hours passed like minutes. When Natalie announced it was bedtime, groans erupted from the couch. Cameron helped pick up the scattered wrapping paper and packaging, still half dazed from the whirlwind. At the door, Natalie handed him back one of the gift bags, this time filled with carefully folded artwork and photos. They've drawn a lot of planes, she said, smiling just a little. You'll like these. Thank you. Cameron said, his voice thick. You did better than I expected, she added, glancing back toward the living room. They're incredible, Cameron said. You've done an amazing job. For the first time, Natalie's gaze softened. Not completely, but enough to show he'd cracked something open. There's a baseball game tomorrow, she said. Aiden's playing Greenbridge Field. 10 a.m. I'll be there, Cameron said without hesitation. Natalie nodded. He'll be watching the stands. As he walked back to his car, the street seemed quieter than before. The night air was cool on his skin, the silence of suburbia wrapping around him like a strange comfort. For the first time in years, he didn't care about profit margins or market projections. All he could think about were 3 boys, one eager, one brilliant, one wounded, and how he'd do whatever it took to earn their trust. This time he wouldn't walk away. Cameron arrived at Greenbridge Field 30 minutes early, the morning sun already warming the aluminum bleachers. Aiden's baseball game didn't start until 10 hours, but Cameron hadn't trusted himself to risk being late, not after everything he'd missed. He took a seat near the third baseline, carefully brushing dust off the bench before sitting down. The last time he'd been at a ballpark, he was watching a client's luxury box at Fenway. This was different. Here the grass was a little patchy, the scoreboard half functional, and the dugouts made of weathered wood. And yet, this felt infinitely more important. He checked his watch again. Still 20 minutes. He didn't care. At 9:45, Natalie appeared at the gate with the boys in tow. Aiden wore his oversized red team jersey tucked unevenly into his pants. His glove clutched proudly in one hand. Liam had a book under his arm, of course, and Noah trailed behind as reserved as ever. Cameron stood as they approached. Aiden spotted him first. "You came," the boy yelled, beaming. Cameron smiled. "I promised I would. Didn't." Aiden rushed forward and gave him an impulsive, clumsy side hug. It was quick, just a second. But it was the first voluntary contact from one of his sons, and Cameron would carry the warmth of it all day. Natalie looked surprised, but gave him a nod. "He's starting at second base today. I'll cheer like a maniac," Cameron replied with a small grin. The boys settled beside him, Liam diving into his book, Noah reluctantly taking the seat on Natalie's other side. Aiden ran off toward the dugout, practically bouncing. As the game began, Cameron found himself genuinely invested. Every swing, every throw, every base stolen made his heart beat a little faster. When Aiden caught a line drive in the third inning, Cameron leapt to his feet, clapping so loudly that several other parents turned to look. Natalie raised an eyebrow at him, amused. "What?" he said, settling back into his seat. "That was impressive." "He'll love that you saw it," she said quietly. A few innings in, Liam looked up from his book and tugged Cameron's sleeve. "Have you ever been to a real baseball game like the Red Sox?" "Plenty of times," Cameron said. "Want to go sometime, all three of you?" Liam's eyes widened. "Really?" "Front row," Cameron added. Then he hesitated, glancing at Natalie. She considered, then gave a slight nod. "If they'd like that, even Noah?" Liam asked, voice soft. Cameron looked across Natalie at his quietest son. "Especially Noah," he said. Noah didn't respond, but his fingers stopped fidgeting for just a moment. When Aiden's team won by a single run, the boy sprinted toward them. Cameron stood expecting him to run to Natalie, but to his surprise, Aiden ran straight to him. "Did you see my catch?" Aiden shouted, nearly bouncing on his cleats. "I did," Cameron said, ruffling his hair. "You were amazing." And then it happened. Aiden grinned up at him and said almost casually, "Thanks, Dad." Cameron froze. He had been called many things, Mr. Whitaker, CEO, founder, genius, shark, but never Dad. Not once. The word fell from Aiden's mouth like it had always belonged there, and it landed in Cameron's chest like a lightning strike. He blinked quickly, forcing back the sudden sting in his eyes. Later, they walked down the block to a small ice cream stand. Cameron bought cones for everyone, vanilla for Liam, chocolate for Aiden, mint chip for Noah. He remembered their flavors by heart after just one dinner and one conversation he would never forget again. They sat on a nearby bench in the shade, the boys chatting animatedly. "Do you have a house like ours?" Aiden asked, licking his cone. "I live in an apartment," Cameron said. "A very tall one, is it fancy?" Liam asked. Cameron chuckled. "Kind of, but also kind of lonely." Aiden wrinkled his nose. "You should get a dog. That's not a bad idea," Cameron said, smiling. Then Aiden turned, looking up with big, hopeful eyes. "Are you going to live with us now?" The question hit like a punch to the ribs. He glanced at Natalie, whose eyes had also widened in surprise. "Nobody lives with us except Mom," Liam added helpfully. "She works 2 jobs. Sometimes at night." Cameron turned to Natalie. "Is that true?" She gave a small, uncomfortable shrug. "Medical billing during the day, online classes after the boys go to bed. Single motherhood isn't exactly a vacation." For the first time, Cameron truly saw the weight Natalie had been carrying. It wasn't just the parenting. It was the bills, the school logistics, the food, the everything. While he had been flying business class across continents, she'd been juggling jobs and raising 3 boys on her own. His mind filled with numbers, private schools, healthcare, college, savings, all things she had somehow covered or struggled to. "Would it help if I—" "Let's not turn this into a checkbook conversation," Natalie said quickly. "I wasn't offering money. He said I was offering to show up." She looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "There's a school concert next Friday." She said, "All 3 perform. It starts at 6:30 sharp. I'll be there. Natalie raised a brow. Noah. Noah is playing piano. He's been practicing for weeks. If you're late, he'll know. I won't be late, Cameron said and meant it. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Cameron crouched and looked at each boy in turn. Aiden, you were a champion out there today. The boy beamed. Liam, next time we meet, bring 2 books I want to read with you. Liam smiled shyly, nodding. Then he looked at Noah. You don't have to say anything, but I'll be there Friday, and I can't wait to hear you play. Noah said nothing, but as he climbed into the back seat, Cameron noticed that he held his mint chip cone a little tighter and didn't let it melt untouched. As he drove away, a strange new feeling settled over him, one that felt both terrifying and extraordinary. Hope, and the fierce, undeniable instinct of a father ready to fight for his place in his sons' lives. Friday afternoon arrived with storm clouds building over Boston, not just in the sky but in Cameron's carefully managed world. At exactly 4:52 p.m., he sat in the sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the 32nd floor of Whitaker Dynamics, finishing a video conference with a half-dozen executives from Global Core Capital, the firm spearheading a $300 million investment into his company's new Asian expansion. As you can see, Cameron was saying, clicking to the final slide of his quarterly projections, our Q3 numbers show upward momentum across all verticals. The Southeast Asia supply chain is stabilizing, and we're anticipating a 22% revenue lift in the coming quarter. He glanced at the wall clock. 6:30 was still a ways off, but not far enough to feel comfortable. Mr. Whitaker, one of the Singapore partners, spoke up, his tone pointed given recent economic volatility. I believe it would be wise to extend this meeting to discuss contingencies specifically in Malaysia. Your proposal shows no accounting for further shutdowns. Cameron's stomach twisted. I'd be happy to address that in a follow-up, he said evenly, though. Tension pulled at the edges of his voice. I have a prior commitment this evening. His assistant, Sophie Lang, sitting beside him with a tablet in hand, glanced up sharply. Cameron Whitaker didn't cut meetings short, ever. The investor frowned. Surely your schedule can allow 10 more minutes. This is a multi-million-dollar agreement. Before Cameron could answer, his phone vibrated a call. Then another. A third buzzed with an urgent notification. He muted the device, but it buzzed again immediately, this time flashing the name that made his pulse spike, Natalie Rhodes. He excused himself from the screen and took the call just outside the boardroom. Cameron. Natalie's voice was breathless, panicked. It's Liam. He fell on the playground during recess. We're at Boston Hope Medical. They think his arm might be broken. Cameron's world narrowed to a pinpoint. I'm on my way, he said without hesitation. He ended the call and stepped back into the boardroom. I'm terribly sorry, but I have a family emergency, he told the stunned room. We'll reschedule the second half for Monday. Sophie, follow up with Global Core and handle all correspondence until further notice, the Singaporean investor's voice cut in. Frustrated, Mr. Whitaker, this is unacceptable. Cameron met the camera dead on. My son is in the hospital. That's not negotiable. And with that, he ended the call and walked out, ignoring the stunned silence behind him. 25 minutes later, he burst through the glass doors of Boston Hope's pediatric emergency wing, rain streaking down the back of his suit jacket. He spotted Natalie in a waiting area corner. Aiden and Noah sat beside her, uncharacteristically still. Their eyes lit up when they saw him. Where is he? Cameron asked. Breathless, Natalie stood. He's getting x-rays. They think it's a hairline fracture. He's scared. He was asking for you. Cameron collapsed into the empty seat next to Aiden, his adrenaline still pulsing. What happened? He fell off the monkey bars, Aiden whispered. There was blood. He cried a lot. Noah, who had barely looked at Cameron before, added quietly, he said he was going to miss his violin solo tonight. He practiced for weeks. The words landed like a hammer. The recital. Cameron looked at the time. 5:41 p.m. I'm so sorry. Natalie said I know how much this evening meant to him, to all of us. He shook his head. This is more important. He needs us. Half an hour later, a nurse stepped into the waiting room. Liam's asking for his parents. Cameron and Natalie stood in sync and followed her down the hallway. When they stepped into the curtained exam area, Liam sat propped on a gurney, his left arm in a temporary cast. His face lit up the moment he saw them. "You came?" he said to Cameron. "Of course I did," Cameron said, moving to his side. "How's the arm? It hurts," Liam admitted, "but the doctor said I was brave." Cameron smiled. "You are braver than most CEOs I know." Liam grinned a little, and Natalie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. After speaking with the pediatrician and making arrangements for Liam to rest at home that night, the family gathered their things. As they exited into the rainy evening, Cameron walked slowly beside Natalie, who carried Liam's bag while he gently held his son's good hand. Sophie's texts buzzed furiously in his pocket. He silenced the phone without reading them. Back at Natalie's house, Liam fell asleep within minutes of lying on the couch, his cast cradled against a pillow. Natalie tucked a blanket around him and then turned to Cameron. "I know you had a meeting tonight," she said quietly. "Big one." He nodded. "The Singapore deal. Did you walk out of it?" "I did." Natalie crossed her arms. "That's not like you." "No," Cameron agreed, "but I think the version of me who would have stayed in that boardroom doesn't deserve to be here tonight." She studied him. "They'll push back. You're investors. I can handle it," he said. "I'll rebuild trust. I can't rebuild 6 lost years." The kitchen clock ticked behind them as rain whispered against the windows. "You really stayed," she said, more to herself than to him. He looked at her, then really looked at her. The strain in her shoulders, the exhausted gratitude in her eyes. And for the first time, he didn't see her as the woman he left behind. He saw her as the woman who had carried all of it alone and was still standing. "They're not just your sons, Natalie," he said. "They're ours, and I'm not walking away again." She exhaled deeply, then nodded once. "Liam's rescheduled his solo for next Friday," she said. "Same time, same school. He said he wants to try again." "I'll be there," Cameron said without hesitation. "No calls, no excuses, front row." She smiled then, just faintly, but it was real. As he left that night, Cameron paused at the doorway, looking back at the peaceful home he was just beginning to fit into. 3 boys, 1 extraordinary woman, and a second chance he didn't deserve, but would do anything to earn. When he stepped into the rain again, the storm no longer felt like a threat. It felt like something new was beginning. Sunday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the long-anticipated trip to the New England Science Museum. Cameron arrived at Natalie's house at 9:00 a.m., sharp, his suit replaced with dark jeans and a gray pullover. In one hand, he carried a cardboard tray of hot chocolate and coffee. In the other, a bag of muffins from a boutique bakery downtown. Natalie opened the door, blinking in surprise. "You brought breakfast. Thought it might buy me some goodwill." Cameron said, "I heard the museum requires stamina." Inside, Aiden was bounding down the stairs before he could take off his shoes. "Are we really going today?" "You promised I did, and we are," Cameron said, offering him a fist bump. Liam appeared next, his arm in a blue cast but a book already tucked under his good arm. "Do they have a planetarium?" "Best one in the state," Cameron replied. Last to descend, as always, was Noah. He wore a green hoodie with the hood pulled halfway up and didn't say anything, but he didn't retreat either. That alone felt like progress. The ride to the museum was filled with chatter, mostly from Aiden, who had an endless list of dinosaur questions. But Cameron noted how often Liam glanced at him through the rearview mirror, and how Noah, though silent, kept sneaking looks out his window at the city. At the museum, they started with the space exhibit. Aiden raced from model rockets to meteorite fragments, dragging Cameron behind him. "Dad, look at this," he said, pointing to a lunar rover replica. Cameron crouched beside him, trying to match his enthusiasm. "Want to sit in it?" Aiden gasped. "Can I go for it?" Liam read every placard carefully and asked thoughtful questions about gravitational pull and orbital decay. Noah lingered at the dinosaur skeleton's, eyes wide. By noon, it felt like magic. Until his phone buzzed, he silenced it. Another vibration. Then another. Natalie, seated across from him in the cafe, frowned. Something urgent. Singapore again, he muttered. They want edits to the revised contract before their Monday deadline. Can it wait? Cameron nodded, slipping the phone back in his pocket. It can, but it didn't stop buzzing. By the time they made it to the robotics exhibit, his phone had rung 5 more times. He finally stepped aside to answer. I just need 15 minutes, he told Natalie, his voice low, to confirm the document changes. I'll be right back. He disappeared behind a planetarium wall to take the call. The 15 minutes stretched to 20, then 30. When he finally returned, the energy had changed. The boys were listless. Noah wouldn't make eye contact. I'm sorry, Cameron said quickly. Emergency at work, I'm back now. But Noah folded his arms across his chest. You said it would be quick, I know, buddy. Whatever. Noah muttered, turning away. Lunch was quiet. The boys picked at their sandwiches. Natalie said nothing. Cameron's phone buzzed again. He reached for it out of reflex but stopped when Aiden suddenly asked, Is that more work stuff? He nodded. More important than us. Liam asked, eyes sharp. The words pierced him. Natalie stood up. Come on, boys, Mr. Whitaker has to work. We'll meet him at the exit in an hour. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Cameron didn't argue. He just watched as they walked away. 3 small figures that suddenly felt miles out of reach. An hour later, he waited at the museum exit with ice cream cups in hand, but the boys didn't reappear. Instead, his phone buzzed with a single text from Natalie. We took an Uber home. Noah was upset. That night, he sat outside their house in his car, unsure whether to knock. Eventually, he did. Natalie answered, arms crossed. Is Noah okay? He asked. He's been practicing piano all afternoon. Barely said a word. I didn't mean to let them down. But you did. He ran a hand through his hair. The Singapore deal, I don't care about Singapore. She cut in. I care about what happened today. 3 little boys were excited to spend a day with their dad, and instead they watched him disappear again and again to talk to people they don't know. It's not about money. He said no. She agreed. It's about responsibility. And right now you're showing them that they rank below your conference calls. He was silent. They have another concert next Friday. Noah is playing the opening piano solo. Same time as last week. She met his eyes evenly. You missed one. Don't miss this. He nodded. I'll be there. You need to understand something. Cameron, she said, voice tight. You can't be a part-time father. Not with boys like ours. They notice everything. He nodded again. And as he turned to leave, the sound of hesitant piano notes floated down from upstairs. Each note was a reminder. He was already out of second chances. The following Thursday, Whitaker Dynamics' executive team filed into the boardroom with a mix of curiosity and confusion. Emergency meetings were rare, especially ones called directly by Cameron Whitaker with no agenda provided. As they took their seats, Sophie Lang, his assistant, handed out printed copies of a presentation titled The Family First Initiative Redefining Work Culture at Whitaker Dynamics. When Cameron stepped in, dressed in a casual navy blazer with his sleeves rolled, the room fell silent. He didn't open with a joke or warm-up remarks. Instead, he clicked the remote and brought up the first slide, a graph comparing employee turnover at firms with family-friendly policies to those without. I know this isn't what you expected to talk about today, he began, but it's what we need to talk about. The room remained quiet as the next few slides detailed productivity benefits, decreased burnout, and long-term retention among companies that embraced flexible hours and parental accommodations. I've spent the past decade chasing margins and scale, Cameron said. But a few weeks ago, I learned I have 3 6-year-old sons. Gasps rippled across the table. His COO, Jessica Coleman, blinked as if she misheard triplets. He added, I didn't know they existed until I saw them outside a Walmart. Now everyone was staring. I've missed every birthday, every bedtime story, every fever. All of it. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't flinch. And in the last 2 weeks, I've realized I built a company that rewards sacrifice over presence. A company where being a good parent is seen as a liability, that ends today. The room sat in stunned silence as he flipped to the next slide renderings of a new campus. Modern, light-filled buildings surrounded by walking paths, community gardens, and most notably, a full-service daycare on-site school and family wellness center. "This is what's next for Whitaker Dynamics," Cameron said. "Not just because it's good business, but because it's right." Jessica finally spoke. "This is bold, Cameron. But we're in the middle of high-stakes international negotiations. Global Core is already uneasy after last week's walkout. You're asking us to completely shift direction. I'm not asking." Cameron said, "I'm informing. Investors won't like it." The CFO added, "We'll lose capital. I'll fund the pilot myself if I have to." Cameron said, surprising even himself, "We've built something remarkable. Now it's time to make it meaningful." There was pushback, heated discussion. But by the time the meeting adjourned, he saw it in their faces, a spark. Not just concern, but consideration. That evening, Cameron didn't stay late in the office. He arrived at the elementary school auditorium at 5:45 p.m., 45 minutes early. He stood in the hallway, unsure of whether to pace or sit until Natalie and the boys arrived. 10 minutes later, Aiden spotted him first and broke into a run. "You're really early," he shouted, grabbing Cameron's hand. "Like really early? I wanted the best seat." Cameron grinned. Liam gave him a quick hug, careful not to bump his healing arm. Noah approached more slowly. "Cameron knelt break a leg," he said gently. Noah didn't say anything, but he gave a small nod and looked not unhappy, maybe even proud. They took their seats in the front row. Natalie sat beside him, eyes scanning the program. "Noah's first." She whispered, "He's nervous." "I am too," Cameron admitted. The curtain rose. Dozens of 6- and 7-year-olds lined up in rows. Noah sat alone at the piano, small and serious. He scanned the audience and locked eyes with Cameron. Cameron gave a thumbs up, mouthing, "You got this." Noah's shoulders relaxed. Then his small fingers touched the keys, and the auditorium filled with delicate halting notes that quickly found their rhythm. Cameron watched, breath held, as Noah played with care and surprising confidence. It wasn't flawless, but it was beautiful. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. Cameron stood clapping louder than anyone, and Noah, before walking off stage, gave him the tiniest smile. After the show, the hallway was a frenzy of parents and excited kids. Noah approached, holding his hands behind his back. "Did you really like it?" he asked, voice quiet. "I thought it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard," Cameron said. Noah looked down, then offered him a single daisy from a bouquet one of the teachers had given him. "For you," he said, cheeks pink. Cameron took it gently like it was made of glass. "I'm really proud of you," he whispered. Natalie appeared beside them, touched by the exchange. "I don't know what you said to him before the recital," she said as they walked toward the parking lot. "But it worked." "I didn't say anything special," Cameron replied. "I just showed up." She glanced sideways at him. "That's more special than you think." They stopped at her car. Aiden and Liam were already inside, comparing stickers from the concert program. Cameron turned to Natalie. "Would it be okay if I brought them to my place sometime? Just for a few hours, I want to show them where I live." She hesitated. "It's not exactly kid-friendly, is it?" "I'm working on that," he said. "But I'd still like them to see it. Even if it's just once." After a long pause, she nodded. "Let's talk next week. We'll figure it out." As she drove away, Cameron stood in the parking lot alone, holding a paper program in one hand and a single daisy in the other. It was the smallest bouquet he'd ever received, and somehow it meant more than all the trophies on his office shelf combined. Saturday morning arrived with the sun pouring through the penthouse windows, lighting every edge of Cameron's immaculately designed apartment in stark detail. For the first time, it didn't feel impressive. It felt sterile. He stood in the kitchen sipping coffee, staring at the trio of identical photo frames lined up on his otherwise bare console table. Still empty, he picked one up and held it in his hand. He could picture them in it. Aiden grinning with grass-stained knees, Liam holding a book like a trophy, and Noah standing just off-center with that thoughtful expression he wore when he was unsure of the world. He'd text Natalie the night before. "Would it be okay to have them over today? I'd love to show them the telescope." She had responded, "Sure, we have a slow afternoon. They'll be excited." By 11:00 a.m., a soft knock echoed through his apartment. He opened the door, and there they were. Aiden rushed in first. "This is like a spaceship." Liam followed, carefully scanning the room. "It's very clean." Noah entered last, stopping just inside the doorway. "Where's your stuff?" "What stuff?" Cameron asked, crouching to Noah's eye level. "You know, photos, shoes, blankets." Cameron looked around and realized there wasn't much life here, only design. "You're right," he said. "I guess I didn't need much until now." Natalie stepped inside behind them. She wore a sundress and sunglasses, and for a moment she looked like someone walking into an open house trying to guess who lived there. "It's impressive," she said cautiously, "but cold." "I'm working on it," Cameron said, "starting with these." He pointed to the photo frames. "I was hoping maybe I could get pictures of them to put in here." And in my office, Natalie looked genuinely surprised. Then she nodded. "I'll send you some for the next hour." Cameron showed the boys around. They marveled at the floor-to-ceiling windows and tried to guess how many taxis they could count in the street below. They laughed at his echoey guest room and took turns looking through the telescope, gasping when Aiden spotted a seagull flying past. Then, while the boys built a Lego space station at the kitchen island, Natalie wandered to the windows. "It's beautiful," she admitted, "but I couldn't live like this." Cameron joined her. "I didn't realize how quiet it was until I heard them laughing in here." She glanced over her shoulder. "They've never had a place like this. But I think they'd trade the skyline for bunk beds and a swing set," I believe that he said. Just then the elevator chimed, and before he could ask who it was, the door opened. An older couple stood there, suitcase in hand. "Aiden, the woman called Grandma," he shouted, racing to the door. Natalie turned in stunned silence. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" Her parents stepped into the penthouse like visitors on foreign soil. Gerald and Linda Rhodes, well-dressed but visibly wary, surveyed the scene with tight expressions. Surprised Gerald said, setting down the suitcase, "Gerald had a conference canceled in Boston. We thought we'd swing by and see the boys." Natalie looked flustered. "You could have warned me." "And missed the joy of watching you panic," her mother said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When they spotted Cameron, the temperature in the room dropped. "You must be him," Gerald said, folding his arms. "Cameron Whitaker," he offered. Extending a hand, Gerald didn't take it. "We know who you are." "Dad," Natalie said sharply, but her father was already advancing. "The man who vanished, who left our daughter pregnant and alone. 6 years with no calls, no help." Cameron stood his ground. "I didn't know about the boys." "You didn't want to know," Linda snapped. "You left. Now you're playing catch-up with model airplanes and telescope tours." "Mom," Natalie hissed. "I don't blame you for protecting them," Cameron said evenly. "I would have too. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again." From the living room, Aiden called out, "Grandpa, come see what I built." Gerald didn't move at first, but something in Aiden's voice so full of pride melted his stance just enough. He followed the sound into the room. Linda looked at her daughter. "He seems different." Natalie nodded. "He is." The afternoon unfolded in layers. At first, Gerald hovered around the boys like a guard dog shooting skeptical glances at Cameron. But by the time Cameron helped Liam with a tricky Lego piece and complimented Noah's drawing, the air had started to soften. At one point, Liam pulled Gerald over and whispered, "Dad helped me with my science project." Even though he had a meeting. Cameron overheard and blinked hard, feeling emotion rise in his chest again. Later, Gerald stood beside him at the kitchen counter as the boys chased each other with paper airplanes. "You're really trying?" he asked. "I'm all in," Cameron said. "Words are cheap, I know," Cameron replied. But I'm here, I'll keep showing up. That evening, as Natalie packed up the boys' backpacks, she glanced at Cameron. You survived the gauntlet. Barely, he said with a grin. They'll still be watching. I'd expect nothing less. Before leaving, Noah tugged on his shirt. Can we come back next weekend? Cameron crouched. You wanna? Noah shrugged. Your telescope's pretty cool. Cameron smiled. Then it's a date. As they filed out, Gerald gave him a firm nod. Not warm, not welcoming, but not dismissive either. Progress Cameron stood by the window long after they left, the telescope still aimed at the stars. For the first time, his home didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting to be filled. Monday morning brought chaos. The headlines were brutal. Singapore investors withdraw support from Whitaker Dynamics' family-centric campus project. Cameron Whitaker's vision, too soft for global markets. Cameron stood in his office, the city skyline behind him, scrolling through messages on his phone. One after another, panicked texts from the board. Sophie, Jessica, even a few former partners who suddenly wanted clarity on direction. He silenced the phone and stared out the window. Just last week he'd felt unstoppable. Now the weight of his decision felt heavier than ever. A knock at the door. Sophie stepped in, tablet in hand. The board wants to move the contingency meeting up to this afternoon, 4:00 p.m. Cameron raised an eyebrow. That was scheduled for Friday. They're calling it an emergency? He nodded slowly. They want blood, or a reversal. Sophie said gently. He looked down at his watch, 3:18 p.m. Liam's chess tournament started at 4:00 across town. He'd promised he'd be there, just like he had for the recital. Sophie watched him silently, knowing the storm brewing in his head. Cameron turned to his desk and picked up the travel-sized chessboard Liam had left there last week. You know what he said, sliding it into his bag? Let them meet without me. Sophie blinked. You're skipping the meeting. I'm going to a chess tournament. She exhaled, almost smiling. I'll prep the contingency file. Want me to present? You know the plan as well as I do. Better, actually. He paused. If they try to push a vote, stall them. She gave a mock salute, with pleasure. 40 minutes later, Cameron stepped into the packed gymnasium of Franklin Elementary kids clustered around folding tables, chess pieces, clacking referees hunched with clipboards. Parents sat in folding chairs along the wall, nervously watching from the sidelines. He spotted Natalie and the boys. Immediately, Liam sat at his table, scanning the crowd. When he saw Cameron, his eyes lit up. He tapped Liam's shoulder and pointed. He came, Liam whispered. Cameron slid into the chair beside Natalie. You're here, she said softly. They're holding the emergency board meeting right now. Natalie's eyes widened. You skipped it. I didn't skip it. Cameron said, I prioritized. She looked at him for a long time. You really have changed. I'm trying to... The first round began. Liam played with quiet intensity. His face unreadable, Aiden and Noah sat beside Cameron, whispering guesses about the moves. After each game, Liam glanced toward his father, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then came the final match. Liam was up against a much older student from a private prep school one, with trophies already gleaming on the display table. The room quieted as they began. The boys made moves quickly, then slowly. Tension built. Cameron leaned forward, heart pounding as Liam sacrificed his queen. Natalie's hand touched his arm. He's setting something up, and he was 2 moves later. Checkmate. The crowd erupted in polite applause, but Cameron stood and clapped with abandon. That's my boy, he shouted, beaming. Liam turned red but grinned from ear to ear. During the awards ceremony, Liam accepted a small trophy with shaking hands. When given the mic to say a few words, he hesitated, then looked toward the front row. I want to thank my coach, he said, and my dad, for showing me that sometimes you have to give up something important to win something even more important. Cameron swallowed hard. Natalie's hand found his as the crowd dispersed. Cameron's phone buzzed. A message from Sophie Board voted 8-5. Motion passed with conditions. Project proceeds scaled back slightly. You were right. He showed it to Natalie. She smiled. You didn't lose. She said, No. he said. Looking at Liam holding his trophy, I finally won something that matters. Later that evening, back at his penthouse, the boys scattered Legos across the floor. While Natalie sat on the couch nursing a cup of tea, Gerald and Linda were visiting again, watching the boys with quiet affection. Cameron approached the kitchen counter and rolled out a large blueprint. "What's this?" Gerald asked, curious. Cameron spread out the design. It was a refined version of the campus plan, still bold but practical. Modular childcare wings, outdoor learning labs, multi-use family lounges. I've restructured the proposal. Cameron explained. Still visionary, but realistic. They approved it today. Gerald examined the paper carefully. "You're really going through with this?" "I am. It'll cost you, I know, but it'll change lives. That's the goal." Linda walked over, joining them. "You've surprised us, Mr. Whitaker. I've surprised myself." Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Cameron stood at the window with Natalie at his side. "I was scared today," he said, "that I'd lose the company, that I'd ruin the project. But you didn't." She said no, because for once I trusted that doing the right thing wouldn't destroy everything I built. She looked at him, and it didn't destroy it. He said, "It gave it meaning." They stood in silence a moment longer, watching the boys build a Lego city on the floor. Then Cameron pulled out his phone and showed her a new screensaver, a photo from that afternoon. Liam holding his trophy, flanked by his brothers, all three beaming. Natalie smiled. "They look happy." "They are," he said. "So am I." He looked around his penthouse, still elegant, still polished, but now covered in crayons, building blocks and juice boxes. "I never imagined success would look like this," he said. "That's because you used to measure it in numbers," she said. "Now you measure it in names." He turned to her. "Aiden, Liam, Noah." She smiled. "And maybe Natalie." The moment hung in the air between them. Cameron didn't push, but her silence wasn't rejection. It was consideration and hope. The elevator dinged in the distance, signaling another visitor. But for Cameron Whitaker, standing in a room full of laughter, connection, and second chances, it was no longer the high-rise that made him feel successful. It was the people inside it. 6 months later, the winds sweeping across the edge of Newton, Massachusetts, carried laughter music and the buzz of opening day excitement. Families milled around the fresh green lawns and shining glass buildings of the newly unveiled Whitaker Family Innovation Campus, a place that 6 months ago had existed only in blueprints and boardroom battles. Now it was real. And at the front gates, beneath a bright white banner that read, "Welcome to a new way of working," stood Cameron Whitaker. He looked out at the crowd of employees, reporters, investors, and their children. His hand rested gently on the shoulders of his sons, Aiden, Liam, and Noah, each dressed in tiny suit jackets that barely concealed their excitement. "Ready?" Cameron asked. Aiden raised the oversized scissors and grinned. "Let's cut it." With a shared push from all three boys, the ribbon split cleanly in two. The crowd erupted in applause. Flashes popped from cameras. The Whitaker triplets were instantly the stars of the moment, beaming, confident, proud. Cameron crouched beside them and whispered, "You just made history." "Liam," ever the thoughtful one, asked, "Is this where you work now?" Cameron nodded. "This is where we work, learn, and grow." The media swarmed him as they moved inside. Reporters asked about the funding crisis, the delayed timelines, the investor fallout. He answered calmly, "Yes, there were setbacks. Yes, we scaled the project. But we didn't compromise on what mattered, creating a place where work and family don't have to compete." A moment later, Natalie appeared, her dress fluttering in the breeze, and joined the group. She had helped design the on-site Family Wellness Center and had recently accepted a part-time role managing outreach programs for working parents. "You weren't kidding," she said, looking around at the sleek walkways, rooftop gardens, and the enormous childcare and learning wing labeled the Rhodes Learning Center. "You deserve more credit than me," Cameron said. "Half of these ideas came from you." She smiled, touched. "You're building something remarkable." "We're building it," he corrected. Nearby, her parents, Gerald and Linda, stood with warm expressions watching the boys as they excitedly led visitors through the interactive STEM lab. It had taken time, but the walls had finally come down. Gerald had even pulled Cameron aside 2 weeks ago and said, "I was wrong about you." Cameron had replied, "I was wrong about me too." Now, as employees toured the new campus, passing between conference rooms and reading lounges, past stroller parking zones and outdoor amphitheaters, Cameron found a quiet moment to look around. He remembered standing in his penthouse, staring at cold stone countertops and silent halls. He remembered the ache of missing years, the fear of not being enough. And yet, here he was, standing in the middle of a legacy shaped not by quarterly reports, but by connection. Dad. Aiden shouted, racing over, "Come see the robotics room. There's a real drone you can fly." Cameron followed, laughing, then paused. "Wait," he said. "Let's get a picture first." Natalie joined them, so did her parents. And this time, when the camera snapped, the frame didn't feel empty. It felt full. That night, long after the guests had gone home, Cameron returned to the penthouse for one last visit. The apartment still looked the same, but felt completely different. He walked to the console table and slid 3 printed photos into the frames. Aiden at the ribbon cutting, grinning with his whole face. Liam holding his chess trophy, flanked by his brothers Noah, seated at the piano mid-performance, face full of concentration. Then he opened a cabinet and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were the signed documents for the sale of the penthouse. The buyer was an international investor who loved the minimalist design. Cameron smiled. He had found a house with a yard in Newton, close to the campus, close to Natalie, close to home. He placed the envelope beside the frames and whispered, "Goodbye, old life." Before he left, he paused to look through the telescope one last time. The stars hadn't moved, but he had. A few weeks later, a quiet Sunday morning found him on the living room floor of his new home, buried under Lego pieces, building a model spaceport with Aiden, while Noah read instructions and Liam organized parts by color. Natalie entered from the kitchen, drying her hands. "They've been up since 6, she said. Apparently the Mars station needed reinforcement. "It's a critical mission," Liam said seriously. "Very," Cameron agreed. Natalie laughed and joined them. Outside, wind rustled the trees. Inside, the fireplace glowed. There were drawings taped to the fridge shoes by the door, a half-built puzzle on the dining table. Music hummed softly from the speakers, an old jazz record Natalie loved. Cameron sat back and took it all in. This wasn't the world he'd built through ambition. This was the world he had chosen through love, and it was infinitely better. Noah looked up and said out of nowhere, "Dad." Cameron turned, surprised by the quiet tone. "Yeah, buddy. Are you going to work today?" "Not today," Cameron said. "Today, I'm staying right here." Noah nodded. "Good." Natalie met his gaze across the room. He smiled. He didn't need to win another deal. He didn't need another title, another award, another 0 at the end of his bank statement. He had 3 reasons to stay grounded and 1 reason to believe in second chances. And for Cameron Whitaker, that was more than enough. Before you go, take a deep breath and let that ending sink in. A man who once ruled boardrooms with billion-dollar deals now finds his greatest success in bedtime stories, Lego battles, and piano recitals. Cameron didn't just discover he was a father, he became one. Sometimes the richest lives aren't built in high-rises, but in the quiet moments when someone finally chooses love over legacy. Tell us in the comments, which moment touched you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional tales of redemption, family, and second chances. And remember, it's never too late to start writing a better chapter.